this past week. Anyway, lots of questions from the committee to which he was testifying, interestingly enough, in enterprise architecture. So we had quite a experience with respect to Congress expressing their interest in the department having enterprise architecture. The first time in my view that Congress has been that explicit about that in open forum or in any other manner, at least with the VA. So that was very interesting. Anyway, so top down, if you will, there's growing interest up to now, including our oversight committees, in having a viable, useful enterprise architecture. Bottom up, it does appear that our appropriators are going to take a substantial amount of money out of our budget in our next year appropriation, in the $100 billion range. I don't know that anybody knows the number, but that appears to be the case. So we now have a very compelling bottom-up driver with respect to streamlining and using enterprise architecture and all the archaeology that one would engage in from bottom up to understanding what's running out there, how much duplication is there, what's the underutilization, what's the capacity demand mismatch on our infrastructure, all that stuff. We're going to start through now, and interestingly enough, Roger Baker has put the VA CTO, that's Peter Levin, and the VA architect, that would be me, in charge of that scrub. So we're doing that bottom-up scrub now to find whatever that bogey is that Congress is going to create for us. We're going to be doing that now for probably the next 3 months. Okay, but interestingly enough, the DA is to be front and center in the way we approach that. We are working as we move forward on that with that exercise I just described. Obviously, going to generate a lot of information. Unlike Y2K, this time around, as we go through this budget scrub, we're going to capture all that information and perpetuate it in some sort of persistence mechanism, presumably our EA repository, which we now anticipate having actually awarded in June. That solicitation has worked its way through GSA. But anyway, keep all that information and use it as one method of building out an enterprise architecture, again, for future reports and whatnot. If you all remember the Y2K exercise, certainly we in the Department of Defense no sooner determined where all those all that remediation had to happen. As soon as we determined that, we took all that data and threw it away. So we don't intend to do that again, at least we in the VA. So we're working our way from top to bottom, and you'll see some more graphic determination of that as we go forward here. But I think, as Brian said earlier about usefulness, I would agree completely with his definition. With those 4 customers that I just described, the bottom line is can our architecture and the artifacts and the information, the reports generated against those artifacts be used by those 4 customers I just mentioned, and they be used by the comptroller for CPIC, and they be used by the product developer for largely software development, can they be used by operations for engineering, and can they be used by information security office for cyber security. We do intend to expose our architecture to industry more and more as time goes on. We did do that in VA, I'd say now about a year ago, through our Technology Acquisition Center. We had what you would probably call an industry day. We call it an advanced program briefing for industry, APBI. We had one about a year ago solely focused on architecture. Had, I don't know, 400 people from industry show up. We had probably 2 to 3 weeks of briefings back from industry to us after that was over. And one of the uniform suggestions or criticisms of the VA architecture at that time was that it's not sufficiently granular, not sufficiently detailed to be useful. So it's another input mechanism which we found useful and would intend to reuse again in the future to make sure we're getting to that point of utility and just using them as an example. As an example of end users against which we can test the usefulness of our where we are with reference models, just by way of a little bit of a report card, for reasons that, I don't know, maybe happenstance or interest of our senior leadership. Our senior leadership was more interested in a bottoms-up approach initially with the top-down, hence we've made a little bit more progress and perhaps are a little bit more mature at the TRM level, the technical reference model. We do have a TRM. We continue to improve that. Each division, each of those 4 customers that I just mentioned had their own version of, well, 3 of them did anyway, had their own version of an architecture review board. All now agreed we're only going to have one architecture review board for OIT and therefore one architecture review board for VA. That's all been agreed to, so we're in the process now of standing up that single board. That board does the care and feeding, this technical reference model, and does the analysis work to understand if waivers are necessary for some set of reasons or not. So anyway, that memo is on Roger's desk now, and I anticipate within a few days that'll get signed out. Anyway, so that's moving forward perhaps a little bit fast. It's also self-contained within OIT, right? So it makes it a little bit easier to get that stood up, because all of us who are going to be working on that TRM and the Architecture and Engineering Review Board all work for Roger Baker. As you move up the food chain there, SRM the same thing, but as you get to the data reference model, business reference model, strategic, obviously we have a lot of partnership activities we have to engage in with PHA, BPA, cemeteries, where they become the principal movers there, the leaders with respect to the thought content of those reference models, so the business processes and so forth, to deal with all that red tape that I showed you on the first slide. So I'd say we're not quite as far along there with respect to actual content and integration across the department as we are with TRM. However, I would say that the human relationships are all very well worked out. So the allocation of responsibility across those reference models, the collaboration mechanisms are all in place. We're collaborating quite effectively. If you look at some of the lockdowns that I told you we had, the one at the NDC, very broad-based representation and attendance at those from across the VA. So from the human perspective of collaboration and human networking, I think our mechanism is pretty well in place. We have a pretty good culture of peer-to-peer collaboration. And that piece of this, I think, is pretty well established. I'd say getting close to being part of our culture. I'd even stick my neck out that far. One of the reasons I think I'll point out to you all, if you don't know that, I'll mention it to you, some in the room probably do, but we have probably the most empowered CIO in the federal government. So you understand the context in which I'm describing all this to you, and in large part why I can describe all this to you this way. All of the IT employees in VA, all of the funding, all of the systems, and all of the contracts related to IT all belong to one person. That's the VA CIO, the Assistant Secretary for Information Technology, Roger Baker. So the command and control constraints, I guess you could say, that DoD has to face with OSD, the services, the Federation, all that kind of stuff. We do have a very direct command and control structure, fortunately, and allows us to take a consolidated view across the department. You'll see more of that as we go through here. So I'll just mention, for example, we have 7,000 OIT employees, right? They all belong to Roger Baker. And then those are all the IT employees in the department, as an example. Okay, so enterprise security architecture, obviously we need to protect information. There will be no surprise to any of you here that by and large we're starting with defense in depth, which is a perimeter defense notion, if you will, where you basically behind all this is still keep the bad guys out, so to speak. And although we talk a lot about information protection, the fact of the matter is, if you actually look at it still today, what we're actually doing is protecting our networks and protecting our applications. By and large, we are still not protecting our data, in fact, if you really get down to it, although by misnomer and by hand-waving, we talk about information protection. That's actually one thing we have yet to protect. But with respect to who can access our network, who can access our applications, yes, we have lots of activities going on there, up to and including addressing material weaknesses in those arenas that we have to get to. But getting all the way down to the granularity of actually defining role-based or attribute-based access to data, we're not quite there yet. We have recognized that as an objective. I dare say in our collaborative governing bodies with the Department of Defense and the Interagency Electronic Health Record, they have explicitly espoused that as a goal to extend information protection and access